Earlier this year, disaster struck the Rimworld. 12 magnificent Thrumbos and their alpha embarked on what was meant to be an innocent coming-of-age day trip into a local cavern system, known for its two distinct features: extremely tight corners and its atrocious structural integrity. At the deepest point of the underground labyrinth, a roof collapsed, dropping hundreds of tons of solid stone and sealing the majestic beast inside. 6 brave colonists took up the call to free them, but with absolutely zero ability to mine though, they only had one option: blast the rock out the way with millions upon millions of bullets. This is their story. This is Thrumbo Cave Rescue. In the immediate aftermath of the initial catastrophe, the rescue force arrived around the edge of the sector, quickly establishing a forward base camp around the crumbling ruins of an ancient structure. To secure the area, Chuck immediately demonstrated the colony's preferred method of debris removal, by firing high caliber rounds into an ancient generator until it ceased to exist. Basic sleeping spots were thrown onto the dirt floor. There's a little time for comfort while the team plan out their first moves. Chuck went over to the mountain and mapped out the initial insertion point, laying down markers against a mountain face that had no idea what was coming. By midday, the assault began. 5 colonists stood shoulder to shoulder, unleashing a torrential wall of lead into the ancient stone, blasting it with their pistols and singular shotgun, while Haley maintained site cleanliness around the firing line. Initial progress was rapid. Within hours, the team breached a small natural cavern, celebrating a quick victory and moving forward 8 tiles instantly. This would be the very last piece of easy geology they would encounter. As the shaft deepened, the colonies jostled for firing positions, each eager to leave their mark on the mountain. But in a crisis of this scale, endurance is key. There was a lot of distance yet to go. As darkness fell, a halt was called for the first night. Exhausted, the team immediately downed their tools to eat, taking solace in the fact that they have successfully bullied 15 tiles of solid rock into submission on day 1. They retired to their make-do shack to sleep. Day 2 arrived with the quiet dignity of a humanitarian crisis, as there was no well established to draw water from. The entire team marched to a distant pond to wash and bathe before returning to the front line. Daisy arrived first, discharging her pistol into the dark as fast as her hand could reload. Meanwhile, Toby and Chuck began expanding the base camp, installing a basic wood-fired stove and tables to raise the camp from a ruin shack to a permanent outpost with one goal: free those Thrumbos. Deep within the shaft, 4 colonists blasted away at the mountain, their faces showered in a constant rain of sharp rock debris. Percy took a quick break from the firing line to construct the outside latrine, immediately christening his newly built facilities. To minimise trip hazards along the now established firing line, the pulverised chunks of mountain were designated to be hauled away, while Percy dug a freshwater well to properly supply the kitchen and cleaning operations. Chuck took total command of the blasting team, emptying his shotgun repeatedly at break rock speed until the end of the shift was called. Logistics, however, were beginning to look grim. Recognising that food security would soon threaten the mission, the local wildlife was turned to and placed squarely on the menu, with 3 local alpacas chosen as the first targets. Desperate for proper rest, Percy attempted to construct real beds, managing to complete 3 before collapsing directly onto the floor anyway from sheer exhaustion. By the 3rd day, the psychological weight of the operation began to break apart the team's unity. Toby and Daisy showed the first severe signs of mental cracking under the pressure. Toby went on a relentless insulting spree against Daisy, who could do nothing but wander through the camp in a catatonic daze. Toby somehow managed to keep up his psychological warfare until dawn, but the small blessings were that Daisy was too spent to even hear it. Looking to restock their dwindling rations, Chuck took a break from the cave face to hunt down the chosen alpacas. His accuracy, rusted by days of shooting stationary rock at point blank range, was severely lacking, but a lucky shotgun blast eventually brought down the beast. At the worksite, Percy kept the operation alive by firing his pistol single-handedly into the dark. Outside, Dixie and Haley deforested the area around the base, securing enough wood to finish the remaining beds, lay down basic flooring, and establish a butchering spot. The outpost now consisted of 2 complete rooms. Deep inside the mountain, the men worked tirelessly, slowly carving a spacious 2-wide channel through the bedrock. A local reporter team arrived on site to cover the unfolding drama, though they offered absolutely nothing of value to trade and were largely ignored, considered a nuisance by the team. As the first alpaca was brought back to the butcher's table, plans were drawn for a proper supply warehouse to clear the camp's walkways. The shift wrapped up once more, and the weary crew ate their meals before breaking off back to camp business, having made small progress through the mountain. A research table was laid down in the camp's kitchen. Haley, having some experience with researching new technology, was tasked with trying to develop some stronger firearms to make faster progress through the rock. At no point during her research did she consider discovering the concept of a pickaxe. With the warehouse completed, the camp was finally cleared of clutter. The team struck a massive vein of steel. Hopes were high that this metal could be transformed into weaponry, but the team quickly discovered that blasting a steel vein with low caliber bullets yields almost zero usable metal. Progress slowed to a crawl. The pistols were proving ineffective against the deep stone, leaving the heavy shotguns to carry the entire weight of the rescue. After another long day at the research table, Haley ended her shift by heading outside the Cloud Watch, joined by 2 of her comrades. Together, they stared into the sky, praying for the survival of the 13 majestic beasts trapped in the dark. The day appeared to be drawing to a peaceful close, when a sudden alarm rang through the camp. A group of heavily armed poachers arrived on the map, seemingly there to harvest the trapped Thrumbo horns for profit. The colonists scrambled to defensive positions around the shack, well armed but exhausted. A bloody, chaotic firefight ensued. Bullets flew in every direction as the raiders launched Molotov cocktails wildly, setting the base camp ablaze. Amidst the crossfire, Haley was struck by a stray round and collapsed into the dirt. Though victorious and the remaining poachers fleeing, the colony was left in a state of absolute emergency of blood and fire. Chuck, suffering a disconnect from reality, was found cowering in a distant corner of the map, though he eventually stiffened his resolve and returned to help tackle the raging fires. Haley was carried to a medical bed in critical condition. Despite his own wounds, Toby dragged himself into the wild to collect heal root for the patients. Daisy worked through the night without sleep, tending to flesh wounds and severe bruising, desperate to save every life she could. Outside in the dirt, a lone raider lay moaning, receiving an absolute 0% margin of sympathy from the survivors for his crimes. By morning, Toby and Percy were bandaged to the best of Daisy's ability. It was then they spotted a new anomaly inside the base. A wild, unkempt Yitakan woman had wandered into the camp completely unnoticed, casually swiping one of the colony's few precious survival meals and sitting at their table to eat it. The team suddenly realised their warehouse lacked a functional door, leaving the critically low rations entirely exposed to wild humans and local squirrels. Chuck dragged himself out of bed, neutralised a squirrel inside the kitchen with a shotgun, and went out into the wild to restock their food supply. Just then, a massive group of exotic traders arrived, choosing to herd their pack animals in a camp directly outside the outdoor latrine. To complicate matters, Percy developed a severe infection in his wounds. As Daisy fought to keep him stable, the wild woman remained firmly in the kitchen, continuously eating their food and refusing to leave. Inside the mountain, the mineshaft stood completely empty. The Thrumbos were in peril, but the rescuers were now fighting for their own survival. Hoping to secure the perimeter, Chuck finally installed a door on the warehouse, entirely unaware that he had locked in a highly volatile boom rat inside with the food. Rather than risking a catastrophic detonation within the base, the team decided to leave the doors wide open, hoping the creature would choose to leave of its own accord. The traders continued to huddle around the facilities as fresh meat was brought back to the reconstructed butchering table. Eventually, the traders realised they were not welcome and departed, allowing Percy to finally use the latrine in peace. Chuck utilised the toilet next. Having been too embarrassed to use it while the traders were present, Chuck unleashed a bowel movement of such historic, catastrophic proportions that it physically broke the plumbing system. Haley was left with the unpleasant task of cleaning the system. To atone for his plumbing mishap, Chuck was assigned the duty of hauling raider corpses away from the camp and repairing the fire damage to the inside of the base. Finally, the team had managed to steal another moment to shut their eyes. In the morning, a horseshoe pin was constructed to provide a small dose of entertainment during downtime, before the grueling work at the rock face resumed. The pressure broke Toby once more, sending him into another volatile insulting spree targeted directly at Haley. Refusing to tolerate the abuse, Haley delivered a swift slap to the face, winning the resulting social fight cleanly. United by a new respect and lingering adrenaline, the pair marched down a tunnel and successfully blasted away 4 more tiles of granite. Eventually though, a grim tactical decision had to be made. Up to this point, the tunnel had been maintained at a safe, 2-wide clearance. As progress was deemed too slow, leadership ordered the shaft narrow to a single tile. A claustrophobic nightmare awaited the crew, but they pressed on, clearing debris in the dark. Back at the base, Dixie and Toby receiving proper medical patches after their tussle. Percy attempted to deliver a torch to illuminate the terrifyingly deep shaft, but due to severe cognitive fatigue, he dropped only half the required wood down the tunnel, suffered a massive mental break, and began pigging out on the colony's raw food reserves. The mountain was taking its toll. 4 healthy colonists returned to a single wide tunnel to maintain the barrage. Suddenly, a solo Imperial noble arrived at the camp, requesting temporary protection from an unknown threat. He carried no weapon, performed no labour, and was deemed entirely useless addition to the logistics team. Moments later, a single mad hare triggered an alert on the border. Haley neutralised the threat with a few clean shots, but the rest of the colony, entirely misjudging the scale of the crisis, ran frantically down the path to assist with an already dead rabbit. Deeply disturbed by the rabbit incident, Haley entered a colony-wide insulting spree. To keep morale up in a crisis, Toby immediately arrested her, marching her to a room and freeing her seconds later to knock her back to her senses. Upon her release, Haley knuckled down and made an intellectual breakthrough, inventing the concept of gunsmithing. While an actual upgrade to their current firearms was a while away, the colony recognised they still had a long way to go through the mountain, and research continued. The noble shuttle arrived shortly after, and he boarded with absolutely no fanfare. A far greater fanfare arrived with the noble's extended family, who bestowed a formal honour upon Daisy for her protective services, granting her the psychic ability to completely block physical pain. Daisy promptly forgot she possessed this miraculous power and never utilised it once during the entire operation. Chuck arrived back with a fresh muffalo carcass, utilised the bathroom, and headed back to the mine. For the second time, he'd left the facilities completely destroyed, leaving Percy to draw the short straw for cleanup duty. Deep within the shaft, Dixie suffered a complete psychological and physical breakdown, collapsing into the dirt. Toby, despite suffering from a quite heavy starvation from long hours, took up the mantle and began carrying her unconscious body back down the long tunnel. Toby single-handedly navigated the entire length of the shaft, dropping Dixie at the base door before stumbling towards the warehouse for well-deserved food. Haley rushed to assist the fallen Dixie, only to suffer an identical mental breakdown directly on top of her. Both women were left completely unconscious for several days, requiring constant round-the-clock feeding. Chuck continued his solitary bombardment to the mine base, pausing briefly to hunt a nearby muffalo. He managed to enrage the beast into attacking back, but through a series of desperate dodges and rolls, he escaped damage entirely, bringing down the beast in a few shots. Chuck and Daisy returned to the depths for further rescue operations. The isolation proved too much for Daisy. She snapped, unleashing a barrage of insults at Chuck. Chuck's immediate response was to place her under arrest and escort her all the way back out of the mountain, releasing her directly into the warehouse to cool off. Another day dawned. Percy headed into the darkness to place down some torches, only to receive the shock of his life when the wild woman materialised from the shadows to steal his meal. Seeing that she meant no harm, he left her to the theft and continued his work. 4 team members maintained the bombardment, lit only by the rhythmic muzzle flash of their weapons, before returning home for the evening. Outside, Chuck managed to enrage yet another muffalo, ending it again quickly with his shotgun. Before the meat could be processed, however, the wild woman arrived to snap up the new hunting trophy. Annoyed, but seeing her presence as more part of the scenery, Toby rushed to butcher the muffalo before the Yttakin could nibble any more of their rations. Just as Daisy and Chuck returned to the bottom of the very deep tunnel, a second raid appeared on the horizon. A smaller band of poachers, attempting to storm the perimeter, but the colony assembled rapidly, finishing the threat on the border before the raiders could organise properly. The victory cost a few minor wounds, which Haley easily brushed off with a little medical treatment. Percy, however, took several severe hits to his torso. As Daisy bandaged his wounds, Percy began violently vomiting up his last meal, growing visibly weaker by the hour. The profound stress of the operation was consuming him. The team returned to the mountain, firing until their barrels glowed red hot, then returned to base. Another day had passed, yielding only a handful of tiles, but it was progress nonetheless. The strain finally claimed Chuck, who entered a catatonic daze in the tunnel. The timing was catastrophic, as a third, vastly superior raid arrived at the border, heavily armed and seeking blood. A vicious, desperate firefight broke out the moment the defenders reached the emplacement. Swarmed by the intruders, bullets tore through the camp. Dixie fell to the ground, closely followed by Percy. Though the raiders were eventually driven off, the cost was devastating. Percy and Dixie were carried to the medical beds in critical condition. Daisy, having taken several bullet wounds herself, could only offer rudimentary medical tending through her own pain. Toby marched into the raging storm, desperately searching the wilderness for any remaining wild heal route. It was no use. Percy developed a massive infection in his torso, and the prognosis was grim. Incapably blind to limitations of medicine, Chuck confronted Daisy, screaming at her for failing to do more to save his best friend. Chuck was left alone to sit in the dark, reflecting on his anger and the dire situation he had put Percy in by losing his senses. Outside, the wild woman looked to have got caught up in the battle, but actually attempted to hunt a wild hare and lost the battle spectacularly, left bleeding out near the entrance. Despite her status as unauthorized squatter, she had sort of become the colony mascot. Toby marched outside to bandage her wound, leaving her in the dirt where she preferred to heal. Toby spent the whole night doing everything in his power to keep Percy comfortable, but the infection was aggressive, and their medical options were exhausted. The colony returned to their posts, waiting for the inevitable. On the 7th of August, Percy succumbed to his wounds. The colony fell silent. The rescue had claimed its toll on the team. Chuck went out to dig a grave, placing it directly at the foot of the tunnel entrance where he and Percy had spent so many hours working on their grand adventure. He carried his friend to the plot and buried him in the quiet. He attempted to utter a few words to mark the passing, but the words failed him. The only person listening was a local squirrel, which felt like enough. Seeking distraction through labour, Chuck began to return to the worksite. It was then he noticed something left behind on the corpse of a fallen raider. A high-grade package of medicine. Medicine that could have saved Percy's life. A medicine Chuck realised he had personally walked over at least 10 times. Pure, unadulterated rage consumed his mind. Chuck grabbed a crate of high-explosive military grenades. Percy would not die for nothing. Those Thrumbos would be freed, or Chuck would die trying. He was driven by one goal, and one goal only. Hurling one grenade after another into the single-tiled tunnel, epic explosions reverberated through the mountain, doubling the speed of clearance. Chuck ran frantically backward with every detonation to escape the blast radius, but Dixie stood proudly at the face, entirely numb to the danger, fueled by the loss of her friend. The end was drawing near. At the base, Daisy fed the exhausted workers with fresh meat, while simultaneously feeding the wild woman, taking comfort in the fact that she had the power to save at least one life. Only moments later though, she entered a murderous rage and stormed down a tunnel with bare fists. With absolutely no room to manoeuvre in the one wide shaft, Haley and Dixie were forced to make a desperate stand, throwing fists at their own medic until Daisy collapsed unconscious. They dragged her body out of the mountain. Haley let out her own residual trauma by launching a destructive tantrum against random detritus and their primary firearms, though the colony left her to work through her issues in isolation. Everyone needed time. Chuck returned to the breach, throwing grenade after grenade into the dark, but with the latest explosion, the acoustics changed. The rock sounded hollow. Tiny slivers of natural daylight began to pierce through the fractures in the granite face. The final barrier was falling, though the team had no idea what condition the animals would be in. Chuck retreated down the long corridor to gather assistance, arriving just in time for one final complication. A final group of raiders, having heard the echoing detonations of the breakthrough, launched a desperate assault on the camp to steal the prize at the exact moment of success. The colonists, pushed beyond human limits, offered absolutely no mercy, utilising every weapon in their arsenal to completely annihilate the raiders where they stood. Chuck and Daisy, now recovered, made their way up the epic length of the tunnel one last time to secure the breakthrough. Dixie already stood at the base, chipping away at the loose fragments with her pistol. As Chuck tossed the final grenade, Dixie sprang forward into the dust to check for signs of life. Light exploded into the dark corridor and towards Dixie. A massive clearing opened up before them. They ventured into the clearing, hesitant and terrified of what they might find after 16 days inside subterranean isolation. They looked across the grass and found them. All 13 Thrumbos, alive, healthy, and entirely unfazed by the global crisis that had transpired around them. They had survived nearly 3 weeks in the dark, holding out hope for liberation. The 3 rescuers broke into frantic cheers, realising the sheer magnitude of the miracle they had just achieved. The colonists began to lead the massive creatures back down the narrow, single-tile passage. The Thrumbos happily gallivanted through the cramped corridor, eager to see the outside world. Fresh air blew down the shaft. It smelled like freedom. They exited the cave mouth to frantic cheers of the remaining base camp crew. A passing trader literally named Weirdo was present at the camp, immediately joined the celebrations without asking any questions. The Thrumbos were free at last, and the colony threw a party to celebrate their triumph, filling the valley with screams of joy. Haley partied with such reckless enthusiasm that she soiled her pants, though not even that could dampen the colony's morale the way it did her trousers. A formal toast was called at the centre of the camp, a toast to honour those who were lost during the Great Endeavour, to the raiders who had tried to steal their victory, to Percy, brave and noble, who succumbed to infection before the dawn, and Dixie, who had apparently bled to death inside the tunnel hours ago after getting struck by a stray grenade fragment, but everyone had completely forgotten she was there until the last second. And now, she is dead. The end. Thank you for listening. That has been Thrumbo Cave Story, read by Matthew Havel. If you enjoyed this production, please let me know in the comments down below, and there could be more of it. If not, I'll catch you on the rim.